13 people have died from our extreme heat wave. Monday was the worst of it, with Seattle setting a new record high, 108 degrees. We're now learning there were 226 ER visits in the county on that day for heat-related illness. There was also a spike in 911 calls, 214 heat-related responses, all on Monday alone.
As we begin here at 5 o'clock, we start with the devastating impact of our historic heat wave.
More than 100 deaths across the Pacific Northwest, including more than 60 in Oregon, may be tied to the record-breaking heat that started last Friday. Kristen Severance is in the newsroom with the details. Kristen, this is just horrible news.
Oh, just these numbers. Oregon State Police report 63 people died across the state from heat since Friday. 45 of those deaths were in Multnomah County. Now, for comparison here, between 2017 and 2019, there were only 12 deaths statewide from hyperthermia. Hyperthermia is an abnormally high body temperature caused by a failure of the body to deal with heat coming from the environment. Now, the ages of people who died in Multnomah County ranged from 44 years old to 97 years old. Now, many of the people who died had underlying health conditions, and county officials said these people died alone without air conditioning. A county spokesperson said the overwhelming majority of people died in their homes, and we don't know right now how many of the deaths are homeless.
This event did not just affect people who are without shelter, who are living outside. This is folks who were in an apartment building without air conditioning, who didn't get a cross breeze, who didn't have a place that cooled off at all, who didn't have anywhere else to go, who might be living alone.
There were more than 500 heat-related hospital and urgent care visits in the Portland metro area since Friday. We've also learned of between 5 to 10 heat-related deaths in Clark County. And just, again, these numbers are just, they're so high. And just a reminder to really check on our neighbors and really check on people, you know, across the area.
For sure. Kristen.
So important.
80 years ago this month, the Red River Valley endured one of the most trying times in its weather history.
KVRR meteorologist Scott Sinkoff takes a look back this week at how the region was impacted. Scott?
Guys, the weather for this week is looking to get pretty warm, but go back in time 80 years and you'll find a heat wave unlike any the state has seen since. People in the Red River Valley in 1936 tried in vain to cool off during a heat wave that brought a 100-degree mark with no relief in sight.
But I know that it went on for so long, it just didn't end.
It all started July 5th, 1936. Independence Day celebrations were finished for the year, but the Red River Valley was just heating up. The hottest day was July 6th, 1936. The town of Steele hit the all-time record for the Peace Gardens date at a sweltering 121 degrees. Fargo hit 114, whereas across the Red River, Moorhead hit 113 degrees on that brutal day. And with those hot temperatures come fatal results. Some, unfortunately, were not able to take the heat.
At least 9 people died in Clay County alone as a result of heat prostration or other heat-related illnesses. All of them over the age of 64. It was really hard on old people.
It was extremely tough on agriculture in North Dakota and Minnesota. Potatoes and wheat yielded about 10% of what was planted.
So they actually did get off some crops that year, but it was pretty horrendous.
Other economic sectors like factories, construction, and shipping along the river suffered as well, but not as much as the workers themselves.
There was during the Great Depression as well. There was financial difficulties, and people had to work. They had to work outside. And
the people who lived here, like Beth Dill of Moorhead, couldn't get any relief. Some nights when it did not get under 90, she says they could barely get any rest.
They slept on the floor, and they didn't want anything under them. They just wanted to be on the floor. That's the coolest they could find.
And even for Dill, some mysteries still remain.
I do not know how the creameries kept going. I've wondered about that. If they had any way to keep their places cool in order to make ice cream.
TJ Allison, if you look at the almanac, almost every single day in the first half of July still has 1936 as its hottest day on record. And while this coming week will be heating up in 2016, you don't gotta worry. The Weather Authority doesn't expect to see temps quite like this. Scott Sinkoff, KVRR Local News.
An immigrant worker in St. Paul was among those who died in the heat wave. He collapsed at a nursery during our record-breaking temperatures. As Morgan Romero tells us, advocates are outraged and calling for greater protection for farm workers.
Missing a few hours of work could mean their family misses their next meal.
It's sick. It's sick the way that their productivity is literally pitted directly against their health and their life.
Even as the historic heat wave scorched the Pacific Northwest, thousands of immigrants went to work in fields, farms, and nurseries. Sebastian Francisco Perez was one of them. He immigrated from Guatemala to support his wife.
She wanted to start fertility treatments, so he came here to save up money to go back and help her pay for that.
After moving irrigation lines at Ernst Nursery and Farms in St. Paul Saturday, workers found Perez unconscious and dying in the field. Oregon OSHA listed his death as heat-related.
Heat death, heat illness, it is entirely preventable.
Farm worker advocates say they asked the state to adopt a mandatory emergency rule and standards before the heat wave to protect people working outside in extreme heat.
It needs to be treated like the emergency that it is. It's a crisis.
Some of the things that we would like to see included in any kind of emergency rules or standards are pretty basic, frankly. What we want to see is access to cold and clean water at the work sites for outdoor workers that are provided by the employer. We also would like to see access to shade that is going to be adequate to protect all farm workers on the shift and at the site that is close to the fields.
Advocates also want to see frequent paid breaks when temperatures are above 90. Oregon OSHA is investigating whether there were any workplace violations, which could take up to 4 months. OSHA can cite employers for not protecting workers during extreme weather, but the specifics about how to protect them are left up to the employer.
There needs to be enforceable binding requirements that if the employer fails to provide the necessities of life to these people, that there, is going to be some element of being able to hold them accountable when these disasters hit.
When Governor Brown ordered state offices to mitigate climate change last March, Oregon OSHA worked with the Health Authority to come up with specific rules and standards to prevent heat illness. But the pandemic delayed the effort, and a formal rule proposal isn't expected till September.
If we would have had some of these things in place, it could be that Señor Sebastián Francisco Perez could be with us here today.
Morgan Romero, KGW News.
We did reach out to Ernst to ask about working conditions. We have not heard back. Advocates, by the way, are holding a vigil for Perez in front of the nursery tomorrow.
Well, it's not only hot, it's deadly hot. At least 22 people have died so far in the heat wave currently sweeping the country. And conditions will only get more dangerous in the coming days, forecasters say. Factors such as relative humidity of more than 90% and little or no wind are making temperatures that are already high feel downright unbearable. Here's ABC's John Donvan with a snapshot of our sizzling states.
It's all over the map, this heat. 106 degrees in Wichita, 98 in Milwaukee, Oklahoma City 106, 99 in Chicago. And while it seems to be going nowhere, this heat, it is in fact slowly sliding east, which is why the map, literally the map, has been in the headlines almost everywhere. Hot colors we're not used to seeing. Triple-digit temperatures likely just ahead for New York, Philadelphia, Washington. With 27 states on some sort of heat advisory, the almost predictable heat-related casualties in the neighborhood of 24 deaths so far. There is at least some help available in many places. There are cooling centers and water on offer outside the Salvation Army in Lafayette, Indiana.
People may have other ways of cooling off, whether it's taking a 2-hour shopping trip at the mall or sitting at the library for a few hours or going to a bookstore or something like that.
And tonight they were handing out water at the Cubs game in Chicago after that Twins game in Minneapolis a few days back where people were dropping like missed fly balls. See this? A TV cameraman in Indiana found this shot of flowers in the breeze newsworthy because what's desperately missing in all of this heat is wind. And with humidity some places at levels no one can remember, the heat index is crazy. Taylorville, Illinois, 121. Newton, Iowa, 129. Hutchinson, Minnesota, 123. In Oklahoma City,
and just more gross heat, guys. It's really the only thing I can think of to say for tomorrow.
There have been only 2 days in July with a temperature lower than 100. Once it was 98, the other time it was 99. some perspective. Yes, it is hot this summer, but the images that tell us that, the buckled pavement on Iowa's part of Interstate 380, kids getting wet in Indianapolis, firemen getting wet in Kansas, and the laments.
Oh my goodness.
It's very hot. It's very humid today, and it's only getting started.
The chorus of hot weather laments.
Oh, it's brutal. I mean, it's early, but it's still hot.
I can't stand it. I just can't stand it.
It's actually a time-honored summer ritual because we've had hot weather before.
The pattern that we're seeing right now is very similar to the 1930s, 1940s, and actually a little bit of the 1950s
So
as
we've
well.
been here before.
We have been here before, but we have a lot more people. We have a lot more requirements now, and there's a lot more exposure to it, the number of people we have.
Still, this is now, and it does have consequences, economic ones, for example. This heat can be hard on crops. That was evident at this farmer's market.
We ended up with 3 tomatoes off of one vine. That's all. Before they just fried.
And the heat can also hit the nation's corn crop, and corn needs cool nights.
In terms of agriculture, really hot weather can stress the corn crops in the Midwest, for example. We're very concerned right now about the very warm conditions in the overnight periods that strain the growth of the corn crop. So we could see corn that's coming in below expectations, and that slight scarcity will adjust the prices upward.
So corn actually needs the evenings to cool off?
Yeah, it does.
Otherwise
actually.
it doesn't
Yeah,
grow.
you need that kind of balance. You need the cooler evenings and the
So if it doesn't
warmer
cool
days.
off in the evening?
Yeah, we've noticed that last summer too. That was a big issue, that depressed corn yields below the trend line. So that was a problem last year as well, and I think it's going to be a problem this year too.
Cattle in South Dakota have also been falling over dead in the heat, 1,500 so far. And back in the cities,
all of these air conditioners running 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Can we handle it?
We can handle it, but it will strain the utility grid, and we will have some problems occasionally with some rolling brownouts and things like that. But what a lot of people don't realize is that we use other commodities to produce electricity as well, like natural gas, for example, is used to fire up electric plants. And so natural gas supply is running below last year's levels.
it tests us, weather like this, not because it is new, but because it is now. And you see the dust storms blowing around in Phoenix, and you can only dream of the time that will come when the breeze will be cool once again. I'm John Donvan for Nightline in Washington.
Good deal. Yeah, what a nice night for the fireworks out there, and we're glad they're going to organize fireworks, being safe. And now that we're on the other side of that heat wave, we're taking a look at federal weather data. It shows since 1990, summers in the West are heating up more than anywhere else in the U.S. So this heat wave, not as surprising as it seems. An analysis by the Associated Press also shows the daytime highs are rising faster. Meantime, we're still seeing the deadly consequences of that heat wave. Since June 25th, King County has seen 15 heat-related deaths. In Pierce, 12, 5 in Snohomish County, and 4 in Thurston County.
Yeah, the drenching rain, then thunderstorms slamming states overnight. Take a look at this lightning strike right here in New York at Yankee Stadium.
Incredible video, that wild weather all over the country and the deadly record-breaking heat wave scorching the West. Still, many wondering if there's any relief in sight.
So let's get right to Ginger. She's in Seattle tracking it all for us. Good morning, Ginger.
Good morning to you, Robin. At least 76 people dead from that unprecedented heat from here in King County down through Oregon. Up in British Columbia, nearly 100 reportedly dying after all of that heat. And Oregon now declaring a state of emergency because of wildfires. So you know the wildfire threat is high. We've been watching several in California, including this one, the Salt Fire, which is burning just east of Interstate 5. It's now more than 1,000 acres burned, zero containment, and there are new evacuations there. Go closer to Mount Shasta, and you've still got those evacuations in place from the lava fire, which we've been following, still 19% containment, but it exploded up to 17,500 plus acres. Then all of the damage from New York. You can see there, Wappingers Falls, Dutchess County, New York. More than 160 severe storm reports from Maine back to Virginia. And unfortunately, there's still some lingering showers. So from New Mexico all the way to New Jersey, we have flash flood warnings. Michael?
The weather sure has been extreme across the country, Ginger. Thank you so much for that.
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.
The extreme heat wave baking the Pacific Northwest has killed around 100 people in Canada and nearly a dozen in Washington and Oregon. Meanwhile, millions on the East Coast are faced with similar sweltering conditions. Mololengi has the latest.
Life-threatening heat continues to bear down on both coasts, and the death toll is rising. Officials in Oregon have reported 45 deaths related to excess heat in one county alone. At the White House today, President Biden warned of the dangerous conditions in the West.
People are hurting. It's more dangerous for kids to play outside. Roads are buckling under the heat.
Along the East Coast, temperatures continue to climb into the high 90s, with feels-like temperatures hitting 106 in Philadelphia and 103 in New York.
People who have pre-existing medical problems like hypertension and diabetes, high cholesterol, even mental health disorders are at risk.
In New York City, air conditioning crews are working around the clock.
Keep up.
And in Philadelphia, buses were dispatched throughout the city as cooling centers for the city's most vulnerable.
I can expect probably a little bit more today because it's even hotter.
The high temperatures in the Pacific Northwest are beginning to move inland. Throughout the heat wave, Washington state reported more than 1,300 emergency room visits for heat-related illnesses. In Canada, the Vancouver Police Department reported nearly 100 sudden deaths since Friday, the vast majority likely related to the heat. The town of Lytton, British Columbia, hit a record 121 degrees. Doctors urge caution, warning that even young and healthy people have a breaking point. Meanwhile, New Yorkers here have been urged to limit their energy use at homes and businesses in order to prevent power outages, including air conditioning. Lana?
Mola, thank you. For more now, I want to bring in CBS News meteorologist and climate specialist Jeff Berardelli. Jeff, you've been following the record-breaking heat wave in the Pacific Northwest. You warned us when it was coming. So where is the worst of it now, and what areas might see some relief?
So everybody's beginning to see some relief from the crazy, insane high numbers that you see behind me. So that's good news because these are numbers that are almost unbelievable even for meteorologists because you mentioned, you heard Mola mention Lytton, Canada, 121 degrees. That's higher than it's ever been in Europe or even South America. In Canada, shattering the national record by 5 degrees. And in Portland, shattering the all-time record in the city by 9 degrees. Not just a daily record, but an all-time record. But we have cooler air moving in. And it's because we have an onshore wind here to the west of the Cascades. You can see that right here. But watch what happens when I transition to the east of the Cascades. There's a downslope wind, so completely different. You can just go over the mountain passes, and you literally increase your temperatures by 20 or 30 degrees. You can see around Kennewick, temperatures over 100 degrees. Now, tomorrow, notice the purples are beginning to disappear, so things, Lana, are starting to get a little better. But still, Lewiston in Idaho is 105 degrees. But the good news is, look at Seattle, a comfortable 77 and 85 degrees in Portland. So that's one side of the country. Of course, we're going to talk about the other side of the nation, which is also baking in sweltering heat right now.
Well, Jeff, I want to hear you repeat that one more time, that statistic about Lytton, Canada. I knew from your reporting that it had broken Canada's all-time heat record at 121 degrees. But you say that temperature is actually higher than any recorded temperature in Europe or where? Europe or South America.
It's just a crazy statistic. I mean, I have to, as a meteorologist, there is no meteorologist who would have said, yeah, can get to 121 in Canada. But we need to switch our thinking because we live in a climate-changed world. And that means the things that seemed impossible are now not just possible, they are probable. Oh, I definitely just needed to double check that with you because it seems so outrageous. But, we're a little bit self-interested. We want to know about the heat wave in the east. What's the latest that you can tell us on that? So this is the last day of really horrific heat, although tomorrow is still going to be on the hot side. But this is where we were today. Look at this. Newark Airport, 102 was the actual temperature. It was 98 in Boston. So these are all record highs. Hartford, 98. The good news is, some bad news too. You got to take the good with the bad, but there's a lot of severe weather here, but that's going to cool it down. So this is a cold front making its way to the south. Watch out if you're in New England, Pennsylvania, upstate New York. Big time storms rolling through as we head through the evening hours. Could be some severe weather. But notice what will happen as we head through the evening hours. We're still, feeling like the 90s to near 100 degrees, but watch this rain start to make its way to the south during the day tomorrow. So that's really going to cool it down and set us up for what looks to be a very nice weekend ahead in the Northeast with temperatures in the 70s. But there'll be lots of clouds and some rain around, unfortunately. But at least we'll get rid of the heat.
Well, Jeff, before I let you go, I want to ask you about hurricanes because there's a system possibly developing in the tropics. What can you tell us about that? And how is this hurricane season shaping up so far?
So this is potential tropical cyclone number 5. And if it develops, it'll become Tropical Storm Elsa. And if it does develop in the next 5 or 6 days, it will be the earliest 5th name tropical storm. If that sounds familiar, that's because it's exactly what I said last year. All of 2020, we set records for earliest 5th, 6th, 7th tropical system. Well, this one is going to break that record almost definitely. You can see the system's located to the east of the Lesser Antilles. It's going to move quickly across the Lesser Antilles, moving really fast. That should limit its intensity a little bit. It eventually will slow down as it reaches Cuba, but notice on Monday it's got winds of 60 miles an hour just to the south of South Florida. It could be affecting Florida as early as Monday or Tuesday, maybe the Gulf Coast after that. If it doesn't make too much of a turn into the Florida Peninsula, it could be a little further west, but a little bit too early to know. But the bottom line is we have to watch out for a potential tropical cyclone strike as we head into the early part of next week already.
Yeah, we'll certainly continue checking in on that with you, especially given the implications potentially for that Surfside search and rescue mission. Jeff, as always, thank you.
You're welcome.
We've had quite a stretch of hot weather, but it pales in comparison to the summer of 1936. Doug joins us now with a look at the summer of 36. Hi, Doug.
Hi there, Pete. Yeah, that was the Dust Bowl time, and that was the time when just so many records, not only locally here in Wisconsin, but across the nation, were absolutely broken. And basically the hottest temperatures we've ever had. So let's go to the graphics, show you what we had in store. There we go, 1936. Nearly the entire nation saw just some horrible weather, and it was really centered around July. As a matter of fact, when you take in all the temperatures of the summer of 36, it was the hottest in U.S. history. July heat wave killed an estimated 5,000 people, and records weren't that good then. I bet you that number was a lot higher. Here's a look at what happened in Wisconsin during that July heat wave. The Wisconsin Dells hit an all-time record high of 114 degrees on the 13th, and it wasn't only the high temperatures that were bad, it was the low temperatures that were absolutely sweltering as well. Milwaukee had 5 consecutive nights above 80 degrees, and that's when nearly everybody did not have air conditioning. Now in Green Bay, check out this stretch of weather. The 7th, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th, temperatures in the 100-degree range or even more. That is the longest stretch of 100-degree temperatures ever here in Green Bay. And if you notice, July 13th, that was the last day of the big heat wave. That is the highest temperature ever hit in Green Bay, 104 degrees.
Yeah, exactly, right? We know that human-caused climate change makes events like this more likely and more severe. So today, Dr. Jeff Duchin talked on the King County Public Health Call about what we need to do to protect people in the future.
When temperatures soared this week, officials across Washington warned people to stay cool, even opening shelters for the many without air conditioning.
This event has had a profound impact on our regional healthcare system.
And Dr. Jeffrey Duchin says in King County, EMS responses to the heat equal the responses from 2018, 2019, and 2020 combined. That is 370 between Saturday and Tuesday versus 425 in those previous years. 13 people have died in King County because of heat exposure. Oregon is reporting more than 60 deaths. When including preliminary deaths in British Columbia, hundreds of people have died.
Now, this event abruptly shifted our attention away from the COVID-19 outbreak, where we've all been appropriately focused, to an even bigger and more serious long-term crisis, which is the health impacts of climate change.
And we will need to be prepared for worse to come. Do you think if this is our new normal, we can prevent deaths in future heat waves, like completely prevent them, or will we start to see these in the summer in Seattle and Washington?
Increasing frequency of extreme heat and fire and smoke events is our new reality, and we need to expect that. And we can take significant steps to minimize the health impacts from those events. I don't know if we can prevent all deaths, but we can certainly minimize the risk.
Adding to that death toll in the last hour, we've just learned from Snohomish County that they have had 3 confirmed heat-related deaths. Those were 3 people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that we have learned of just in the last few minutes. Now, Dr. Duchin was also asked if he thinks local officials did enough, if they had enough of these cooling centers, enough access for people to get resources in this heat. He says that is something they will look at in the coming days and weeks. We're live in Seattle tonight. Michael Crow, King 5 News.
Let's turn to the big story. It has been 1 week since the historic heat wave hit the Pacific Northwest. Historic and deadly. And each day we learn about more deaths being blamed on this extreme heat. As of today, that number is at 107 people across the state of Oregon. At least 67 of those people died in Multnomah County. I got this email from Katie. She said, "Hey Dan, what would be great reporting on the heat deaths would be a map of where they all were. I would almost bet that there would not be they would not be uniformly spread out through Portland." And Katie, you're correct there. And we have the map. We'll take a look at it. This is where people died in Multnomah County. The darker the color on this map, the more people died in that zip code. The county released this data on Friday, so it is missing some of the newer death reports that we have learned since Friday. But at the time, the county said that no more than 5 people died in each of the zip codes that you see here. We also pinpointed where the county opened cooling centers during the heat wave, and you could see they were kind of spread out all over the city, but not in that darkest area in southeast Portland, which had the highest number of deaths. We should also note only 3 of these cooling centers were actually open 24 hours. And when it got up to 115 degrees, it was pretty hot 24 hours at a time. Now, let's take a closer look at those darker parts of the map in southeast Portland. 97266, which is the zip code for Lentz, had the highest number of deaths. That's one of the poorer neighborhoods in the city, with 20% of people living below the poverty line. The next highest number of deaths happened in 97233 and 97206. The first zip code is part of the Centennial and Rockwood neighborhoods. That's also one of the poorest areas in our community, with 38% of people living below the poverty line. The other zip code is part of the Mount Scott and Woodstock neighborhoods, and that area is more in line with the average income levels for Portland as a whole, with 12% of people below the poverty line. Here's what else we know. The county told us that the majority of people who died were white. 45% of the victims were men and 22 were women. They were between the ages of 44 and 97. The county says they don't know how many, if any, of these people were homeless, but they did tell us that most people died alone in their homes without air conditioning and without a fan. Again, this is just for Multnomah County. At least 40 other people across the state also died in this heat, including a migrant farm worker in Marion County. Sebastian Francisco Perez recently came to Oregon from Guatemala and hoped to make enough money for his wife to start fertility treatment. He was 38 years old. He was found dead during the heat wave after moving irrigation lines at Ernst Nursery and Farms in St. Paul. Over the weekend, you see this was a vigil. People showed up, people who knew Perez, some of them calling for changes to prevent more heat-related deaths like his. And that is the big question really now moving forward. How do we prevent something like this from happening again? I spoke with Multnomah County Commissioner Jessica Vega Peterson about that, and her idea is to send out emergency alerts to people's phones. You might have gotten some during the wildfires last September if you were in one of the evacuation zones, and she thinks extreme heat should be treated as just as big of an emergency.
That is not something that is currently used. But this is clearly a deadly event. This is clearly something where lives are lost and people need to know how to prepare and what they can do to get help. And so that's something that I would love to see us start using in the future. It's going to let people know what kind of temperatures to expect. I think it could alert people to where cooling centers are, let people know like where they can go for additional help if they need it. Remind people to check on their neighbors, to check on their family members, even, people that they may just think are socially isolated and at risk, because that is where we saw so many of these deaths were people who were by themselves and isolated.
How big of a challenge is it to reach out and find the people who aren't connected?
it tends to be, in a lot of these cases, what I'm hearing now is, as you mentioned, with people being isolated, a lot of the people were alone. They didn't have an air conditioning. They didn't have a fan. In some cases, they may not have a computer. They may not have a cell phone. How difficult is it to be able to cross that barrier without the use of the technology we've become pretty used to using in these emergencies?
Yeah. I mean, it is such a sad thought to think about the people who were alone during this and experiencing this heat and not knowing where to go for help or not having anybody to reach out to for help. And I think we all have to do a better job of taking care of each other and reaching out to our neighbors. I think it's an incredible challenge. I mean, people, by the word, they're isolated. They don't have those social connections. They don't have those community connections. And I think it's something that's important for all of us to step forward and to do that additional outreach. We're much more isolated society today, it seems, than we were, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I think things like this heat wave and the deadly impacts it has shows us why it's so important to change that dynamic and to change that trend and really look out for each other and take care of one another.
President Biden is rolling out plans to help firefighters amid historic heat waves from coast to coast. During a virtual meeting with governors of western states, President Biden announced plans to raise federal firefighter pay to at least $15 an hour. Permanent firefighters will receive up to a 10% retention incentive. There are also plans for new satellites to improve early detection and apps to better inform residents of fire danger.
California and some other places, the drought conditions are twice what they were last year. And right now we're seeing record heat in Portland and across the West.
Right now, there are already more than 9,000 firefighters deployed across the western U.S. Since 2015, the country has had roughly 100 more large wildfires every year than the year before. And according to the White House, the 2021 wildfire season is already outpacing the last. The death toll from the past week's historic heat wave is climbing. Record-shattering temperatures in the Pacific Northwest are now blamed for dozens of deaths. At least 76 people died of heat-related issues in the past week in Oregon and Washington state after temperatures reached 118 degrees, while nearly 100 more deaths were reported in British Columbia, Canada.
I felt so sick on the first day of it, so then I could only imagine.
The scorching temperatures leaving bone-dry conditions that are in part fueling more than 40 wildfires in the West. Experts say the kind of historic heat wave that hit the Pacific Northwest would normally only happen once every 1,000 years. But they say with global warming, these extreme weather events are likely to happen more often.
It's July 1911, and a terrible heat wave has descended on America's East Coast. From New York to Boston, citizens struggle to go about their business in temperatures topping 90 degrees Fahrenheit. But as the mercury continues to climb, the crowded cities descend into chaos unlike anything the country has ever seen. Today, summer in New York City is almost as sweaty, with people often navigating the streets in 84-degree heat. However, it's not uncommon for temperatures to rise to the levels seen in 1911. In fact, in July 2011, the city hit a sweltering 104 degrees Fahrenheit. In this day and age, heat waves are not nearly as threatening as they once were. And with the advent of air conditioning, most American citizens can wait out the hotter days in relative comfort. But back in 1911, they weren't so lucky, and much of the East Coast suffered greatly as a result. Almost half a century earlier, the Union had won the American Civil War, ushering in a period of unprecedented growth across the country. And while the south of the country remained relatively undeveloped, the northeastern states became a hive of activity, with most of the country's industry focused in the region. By 1911, the population of the United States had hit almost 94 million, with nearly 5 million of those living in New York City alone. However, the bustling metropolis was growing at a rate quicker than its infrastructure could support, and in areas like Manhattan, residents were struggling in cramped and crowded conditions. Each summer, the warm weather made challenging conditions in the city even more difficult to bear. And even though June 1911 hadn't been too uncomfortable on the East Coast, the following month was a different matter. After a rush of hot air arrived from the south, the temperatures topped 90 degrees Fahrenheit, the start of a heat wave that would last for 11 days. Without the electric fans and air conditioning that make such conditions bearable today, many of New York's inhabitants struggled with the heat. Moreover, the situation was exacerbated by issues such as badly ventilated buildings and overcrowded accommodation. Desperate, many residents left their apartments to seek shade under the trees in the city's parks. But despite these attempts to escape the heat, rising temperatures soon took their toll on the population of the city. And soon, bedlam reigned throughout the sweltering streets. According to a New York Daily Tribune article published July 7, 1911, one partly crazed individual even used a meat cleaver to attack a passing policeman. Meanwhile, in the Manhattan neighborhood of Harlem, one worker became so overwhelmed by the heat that he grew suicidal, attempting to jump into the path of an oncoming train. And just a few miles south, a man reportedly shouted, "I can't stand this any longer," before throwing himself off a nearby pier. As the days passed, conditions grew worse and the death toll began to rise. While the elderly struggled to survive in the intense heat, babies as young as 2 weeks faced a similar fate. Meanwhile, some of the city's thousands of horses dropped dead from exhaustion, their decaying bodies abandoned in the street. However, it wasn't just the heat that was claiming casualties across the city. When temperatures finally began to drop, a deadly humidity kicked in that caused even more fatalities. Apparently, most of the victims died in the mornings when the conditions overwhelmed their worn-out bodies. The monstrous devil that had pressed New York under his burning thumb for 5 days could not go without one last curse, explained a particularly florid article in the New York Daily Tribune. And when the temperature dropped, called humidity to its aid. In fact, by the time that the fatal weather had eventually receded, 211 people had lost their lives across the city. Elsewhere on the East Coast, the situation was even worse. In Boston, the temperature hit 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and thousands of people grew so terrified of suffocating indoors that they slept out in the city's common. In Maine and New Hampshire, the mercury crept up another 2 degrees. Railway tracks across New England, meanwhile, became twisted and misshapen in the heat. In Connecticut, some of the streets became a mass of boiling tar. And out in Rhode Island's Providence Harbor, the resin that had been used to seal the boats began to melt, causing the vessels to leak. At their wits' end, the authorities began resorting to extreme measures in order to keep the population cool. They activated fire hydrants and provided breezy ferry rides free of charge. But despite these efforts, more than 2,000 people died as a direct result of the 1911 heat wave. As well as succumbing to ailments such as heat stroke and exhaustion, some of the victims drowned. They were attempting to escape the unbearable conditions in seas, lakes, and rivers across the region. Finally, 2 weeks into July, a thunderstorm brought the deadly weather back under control. Although 5 more people died after being struck by lightning during the squall. But across the Atlantic Ocean, the trouble was just beginning. By then, the United Kingdom was in the grip of its own deadly heat wave. This disaster would continue until September and result in the loss of many lives. Since the scorching summer of 1911, heat waves have continued to wreak havoc across the globe. For example, in 1936, North America was plunged into extreme weather once more. In some places, the temperature even exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit, creating fatal conditions that caused the deaths of over 5,000 people. In New York City, heat waves have continued throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, with the most recent hitting in the summer of 2018. However, the number of people dying from heat-related conditions in the city has decreased drastically. And according to a 2014 study published in the medical journal Epidemiology, this could mean that humans are beginning to adapt to warmer temperatures. According to the study, the increased popularity of air conditioning is also likely to be a major contributing factor in the decrease of heat-related deaths. In fact, incidences of the latter began to wane in the 1970s, around the same time that the technology was beginning to become more widespread. Certainly, it's far easier to keep cool in the New York City of the 21st century than it was back in 1911. However, luxuries like air conditioning are in no way guaranteed, and the study points out that natural disasters and power outages could easily leave the city without access to them in the future. And without the opportunity to wait out a heat wave in an artificially cool environment, how long would it take for the weather to turn deadly once more?
We have new information as the Oregon State Medical Examiner says 107 people died during last week's extreme heat wave. On an appearance on Face the Nation Sunday, Governor Kate Brown says the state has begun a review of those deaths. KOIN 6 continues to reach out to state leaders for updates on that review. Oregon State Police, they work to count and release the new death totals from heat. Today, their spokesperson told us he would not be involved in any meetings about future heat planning and turned down our request to speak on camera.
The oppressive heat waves now gripping our nation are not only hotter, but also deadlier. Even in the cool Pacific Northwest, temperatures soared up to 116 degrees in Portland this summer. Hundreds lost their lives, and according to one report, most died alone in homes with no working air conditioning or fans.
I'm just sweating and crying and whispering to myself, I don't know what to do.
Shane Brown says it was 108 degrees when he found his mother Jolene inside her low-income housing unit. She used her Social Security to pay rent on an apartment that offered no AC. She's one of Oregon's 96 confirmed fatalities.
There should be ways to get those items and those things without having to put other parts of your life at risk.
Every year, extreme heat kills some 600 in the U.S., more than any other weather event. But the federal government, Oregon, and most states have no broad mandates for cooling devices, even for the poor and elderly in publicly subsidized housing.
We do need to adjust our baseline of what is considered adequate for a person to live and be safe in their home.
Just a few miles away from where Jolene Brown died, Linda Aiken watched in horror as her neighbor was wheeled out on a gurney, losing his life to heat stroke.
Do you think laws need to change?
Yes. I never want to see this, my neighbor going out in a body bag.
Home Forward, which operates affordable housing where multiple people lost their lives, says they can't afford to put AC units inside every residence, adding in a statement, given the scale of the climate crisis, we need all the support we can get.
But the federal government has cut over $1 billion in funding to help low-income families pay energy bills, and few cities have laws requiring landlords to offer air conditioning.
I definitely think it's going to happen again.
Tonight, Shane Brown is speaking out for those like his mother, the poor, the elderly, and the Americans who lack basic access to something so many take for granted every day. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News, Portland.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.
Tony and Sharon, these brutal temperatures have forced organizers to open a second cooling center up in northern Sacramento. This one right here is on 27th and J. They've even extended the days that they're going to have it open from 1 to 8 tomorrow, and we could possibly see it open on Friday. That's because they want people to know they have somewhere to go. The scorching heat bearing down across the valley is turning deadly.
I just think that it's awfully sad.
An 88-year-old woman found dead outside her South Sacramento County home during midday heat.
She was loved by a lot of people, and certainly there's a lot of people that are going to certainly miss her.
It's one of 3 possible hyperthermia cases being investigated by the Sacramento County coroner. A 36 and 49-year-old man were also found dead outside in excessive heat for an unknown period of time.
Excessive heat can be extremely dangerous, so keeping your body cool, staying hydrated, drinking lots of water throughout the day is incredibly important.
Public health officials are urging people to keep an eye on vulnerable neighbors.
If you have a loved one who's older or someone who's in one of those high-risk groups, reach out to them, make sure that they have a plan for staying cool over the next several days.
In response, the city and county have opened cooling centers in Midtown and North Sacramento for people and their pets.
Certainly people are really hot and tired, often just come in and lay down to take a nap.
Officials urge people to stay out of the heat, but it's unrealistic for those around Sacramento who have to make a living.
I feel bad, you know, for the farmers and such around here, because, you know, you have to work when you have to work.
A rough winter for so many and a brutal way to kick off the summer. And the cause of death is only preliminary at this point. An autopsy could take up to 4 to 6 weeks to find out if they in fact died because of this excessive heat. Again, it's going to be hot tomorrow. Be sure to seek shelter.
Yeah, the sad lingering effects. Jen, thanks.